Christmas Stories from Grandma's Attic by Arleta Richardson. Illustrated by Kulin-Sandel. Chapter 11. Aunt Beat's Forgotten Christmas. There are 2 days of the year that no one ever forgets. Her birthday and Christmas, right? If you think so, you reckon without my great Aunt Beat. I suppose every family has at least one eccentric member. Without question, Grandma's brother's widow was ours. Aunt Beat was fiercely independent. Although she happily joined the family for holidays and parties, she lived alone. Her son insisted that she install a telephone, but she usually refused to answer it. He provided electricity, which she also ignored. Since she no longer kept a horse, she walked wherever she wanted to go. My Uncle Roy was openly annoyed with Aunt Beatrice. Grandma was more tolerant. Aunt Violet allowed as how she might just get that way herself if she lived long enough. She did. But to me, Aunt Beat was a continuing wonder. Christmas was Aunt Beat's favorite holiday. Back in those days, when one never saw a decorated tree until Christmas morning, Aunt Beat began celebrating the occasion months ahead of time. Suddenly, without any advance notice, she would shout, "Do you know how many days are left until Christmas?" If I happened to be the one she asked, along about the middle of May, I always had to confess that I had absolutely no idea. "I'm not surprised, Arleta," she would say. "Just like your grandmother, always have your face in a book. You need to keep up with these things." So no one was prepared for what happened the Christmas I was 10. After the church service on this particular Christmas Eve, Grandma suggested that Beatrice stay overnight with us. "So we can get a nice early start in the morning," Grandma explained. To no one's surprise, the offer was refused. "Can't do that. Have chores to do and pies to bake yet tonight. I'll be there before daylight tomorrow." "You can count on that," Uncle Roy muttered. "Sure as death and taxes." Christmas morning came and I was allowed out of bed as soon as the kitchen was warm. Grandma and my Uncle Roy's wife, Aunt Celia, were the only ones about. "Where's Aunt Beat?" I asked. "It's early yet," Grandma replied. "She'll be along directly." Uncle Roy came in. "It's almost 6 o'clock. Where's the Christmas trumpet?" "We'll go ahead and start breakfast," Aunt Celia said, ignoring the comment. "She'll be here any minute." According to our custom, I could open stocking gifts right away, but the other presents had to wait until after breakfast. While Aunt Beat failed to appear while we ate, I began to suspect that things might be delayed even longer, and I kept a watchful eye on the door. Grandma, too, made several trips to the window, although it was still too dark to see past the porch. "I can't imagine what's keeping her," Grandma said. "Do you think we'd better call?" Uncle Roy calmly proceeded with his breakfast. "Save your strength. Even if she weren't deaf as a doorknob, she'd still be too stubborn to answer the telephone. Beatrice dances to her own music." We all knew this was true. Nevertheless, when Aunt Beat had not come by the time breakfast was cleared away, Aunt Violet roused Flora, the town watch person and telephone operator. "Flora, is there any light at Beat's house?" There was a pause while Flora went to look. "Then ring her for me, will you please?" Another long pause. "Well, all right, I know she doesn't, but try every once in a while anyway, and let us know if you get her." The morning wore on, and the ladies began preparations for Christmas dinner. I played a half-hearted game of checkers with Uncle Roy. He wasn't about to admit it, but he was growing increasingly uneasy himself. "Mabel," he called at last, "this child is beginning to look pathetic. At least let her open a couple of packages. Who knows when that woman will get here?" At that moment, the telephone rang, and Uncle Roy leaped to get it. It was Flora. "Letty says that Jake thinks he saw Beat's boy's car out here this morning," she reported. "So she guesses that like as not he took his mother with him." "I doubt that," Aunt Celia said when the news was passed on to us. "It's not like Beatrice to go off without letting us know." "Ha!" Uncle Roy snorted. "Sounds just like something she'd do if you ask me." "Well, I'm not easy in my mind," Aunt Celia insisted. "I'd feel better if you just went on over there and checked out the house." Uncle Roy grumbled as he buckled on his galoshes and wrapped his scarf around his neck. Since it looked like neither presents nor dinner would be forthcoming until the matter was settled, I bundled up and went with him. I sat in the old car while Uncle Roy thrashed the front door, the back door, and all the windows he could reach. After a couple of turns around the house, he came back to the car. "I told Celia this would be a full trip. She's gone all right." The rest of the day passed uneventfully, and everyone agreed that an early bedtime was in order. Uncle Roy banked the fires, Aunt Celia said again what a pity it was that Beatrice hadn't been with us, and we retired. It must have been close to 3 o'clock in the morning when a dreadful battering began at the front door. Uncle Roy's voice rose above the din. "What in thunder is that? Who's there? Hold on, don't bust the house down." All the rest of us gathered on the steps as Uncle Roy flung open the door. Aunt Beat sailed in, her arms full of packages with a pie balanced on top. She stopped and eyed Uncle Roy with surprise. "You still standing around here in your nightshirt?" she boomed. "I told you I'd be here before daylight." She bustled off toward the kitchen and her voice wafted back to us. "Looks like I'll have to get the breakfast started while you get dressed. Can't imagine you oversleeping on Christmas Day. I worked late last night and I managed to get around this morning." We looked at each other in disbelief. Even Uncle Roy was speechless. "She thinks today is Christmas," Grandma said. "Where in the world has she been?" "I know where she's headed," Uncle Roy stated ominously. "Doesn't that confounded woman have a clock in her house? I'm going back to bed." "You can't, Roy. Beatrice hasn't had any Christmas yet. We'll have to get dressed and come down and eat breakfast." Aunt Celia marched back up the stairs and the rest of us followed. "You mean we have to fix another Christmas dinner?" Aunt Violet asked. "And how are you going to break the news that we already opened our gifts without her?" Of course, no one had an answer to that. We dressed and sat down to breakfast, and as tactfully as possible, Grandma asked Aunt Beat where she'd been since the Christmas Eve service. "Why, home in bed, of course. Where else would decent people be?" "You mean you slept all day Christmas, Aunt Beat?" I asked. "Certainly not," she replied indignantly. "Why would I do a thing like that? 'Tain't even daylight yet. I was up before any of you were." Uncle Roy pushed his chair back. "Well, ladies," he said cheerfully, "I leave you to sort this one through. I'm going to stretch out on the sofa and catch a few more winks. Call me when it's time to open the presents." He grinned broadly and disappeared. It took some doing, but Aunt Beat finally admitted that she had been pretty tired and that she might have slept through the day if she'd been lying on her good ear. But she denied to her last breath that she had ever forgotten Christmas Day. End of Aunt Beat's Forgotten Christmas. End of Christmas Stories from Grandma's Attic.